And here we go. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shaima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next Builders Education Series call. We are happy that you were able to make some time to get together here on this call where we'll be talking about the improvements in Snap Interactive UI. So in today's agenda, we'll be looking at a brief introduction. We'll talk about what we are going to be talking about today. We'll look at some overview of the Snap UI in general, and then the new components. And some code snippets will be shown, which describes how these components can be used, how effectively they can improve the UI that we have. We look at demo and code, and finally, we'll open up the floor for some Q&A. So as a brief introduction, Builders Engagement. So who are we? So Shaima and I belong to a team called Builders Engagement in Consensus, and our job is mainly to integrate or to meet or to enable builders out there who are interested in building snaps on the MetaMask Snap platform. So we onboard the builders, we have calls with them, we interact with them, we give them training material, we hold such regular sessions where we talk about snaps and snap features, and we've walked them through the process of allow listing until they are allow listed on the directory. And then we introduce the ecosystem team, where the ecosystem team will help in co-marketing strategies with snap builders. So this is a call that is part of those series. So when we say Build Education series, we are having a number of calls, like I said. And if we look at previous calls, it's all on YouTube. I'll be sharing this link. So anyone who has missed the previous calls can always go back there and catch up. Even today's call will be recorded and placed in YouTube. So talking about today's topic, many of us have worked with snaps. We have created UI, we have created dialogues and screens, etc. But there are limiting in certain extent because you can't do much with the UI as the platform is available as a place for all the developers out there to come and add their snap and add their code. So we have to be very careful about how we design this environment where your code runs in it. We have to make sure that it is free from malicious interruptions or anybody accessing your code. So it's going to be a very controlled environment within which the UI can run. We started off with very simple elements where we just had text boxes, or I mean, we just had labels and text. There were no buttons, there were no text boxes. And then we slowly improved where we added text boxes and some kind of interactive element. And now we are coming to the next phase where we have improved on those elements and we have added new elements. Because the main ask for many developers is how can we make our user interface look better? How can we add more functionality? So we cannot release all of the functionality at one time because it's a humongous effort. So we work on it in a phase by phase manner. And today I'll be showing the improvements on existing controls and a couple of new controls that we've added to the mix. So when we're talking about controls, UI, UX, how do they get surfaced on the extension? So within the extension, MetaMask extension, we do have limited real estate, and it's just a rectangle box that shows up at the top of the screen. So the various formats in which information can be surfaced to the user from a snap could be in an on-install event. So the on-install event is something which occurs the moment you complete successful installation of a snap. So it's just once in the lifetime of the snap that this on-install event occurs. And in that event, you can show a small UI informing the user that something like, thank you for installing the snap. Here is something you can look forward to and be done with that. Similarly, we have another event called an on update. So this could occur multiple times in the life of the snap when the user voluntarily updates the snap. So when you release a new version and you want that version to be out there and the user updates their snap, this event gets called. So as a builder, you have an opportunity in this event to surface a UI, which is now going to tell the user what are the improvements you're adding to the snap. So every time the user chooses to update your snap, they will see a small window which you can provide, on which you can show the updates and what to look forward, and if anything has deprecated, and so on. Then you have the home page on the snap. The home page is accessible always by the user, and this is on demand. So the user just goes into the snaps menu on the extension and picks your snap, and then they will be presented with a screen. So the home page is something which can be accessible anytime, and that is where you would focus all your main functionality, all your main user interface, your workflows, and so on. So earlier, all of these dialogues were very simple, but now they can be expanded and interacted upon by the user. These dialogues so far that we've looked at are occurring during these events of an install, update, or an on-demand. And then we have the dialogues. So the dialogues occur at certain workflows which are being performed by the user. So it may not be a direct user interaction, but it would be the users working on some workflow. And as part of that workflow, you would see these dialogues, such as the prompt. So say, for example, you want to just display some information to the user while they're working on something, you show a prompt. Or if there's a confirmation, a transaction is coming through, and then you want the user to see that confirmation where they select yes or no, you show the confirmation dialog. And then an alert. An alert is something like a prompt, but it does not require user input other than just notifying the user of something. So all these areas are where users would be able to see any form of a UI, and that is where you as a builder would use that area for putting in your functionality and your whatever about the snap. So with that clear as to how UI can be surfaced, let's move forward. Talking about these new UI components, rather than just show you the UI components, it's better if we see it through an example and how this example uses these UI components in order to surface your intent to the user. So as an example, I've created a Snappy Airlines snap, and it has been developed by the Snappy Airlines company, fictional snap, of course, and it allows the user to connect their wallet to their airline account. So you have a frequent flyer number, you connect it to your wallet, and the idea is that you can use your wallet to pay in ETH or in any crypto to purchase your flight tickets. So this snap shows some useful information like the frequent flyer number of the person or the user or the passenger, their past flight information, and any of the upcoming flight information. And the main workflow here is allowing you to purchase your flight tickets using your wallet assets. So this is where we'll be showcasing the flow, which is using the improved UI controls, and how we go forward with purchasing your flight ticket on the UI in the Snap. Cool. So let's jump into the meat of this thing, where we start looking at the actual components. The first thing that you see in this code window is the library that we are importing all of these components from. It is MetaMask, Snaps SDK, and JSX. So we've improved all the existing controls into JSX, meaning if you are a React developer or you're familiar with the JSX syntax, then this should be really easy for you because all the components are now being made available in a JSX format. So you can combine HTML and JavaScript and have a very concise component form of design in your approach. So all the components that we see in this list are the ones that have been improved upon and been added into this new JSX module. So when we look at the snap, the box divider, these are things that deal with layouts. The next set of controls are controls which allow the user to interact with the controls, and that's where you can expose your brilliant imagination on how the user can work with your snap. And then we have a next set of controls which are purely display, and you can use them for varying the format or the content of your screen. So looking at some of the first components, which is dealing with layout, the snap component. So every component that you would create in the snap would be a snap component. So the snap component is, as in this example, let's say you're having a user component. So you create a component which is of type snap. The snap component allows you to pass in props. And the example here shows that the props receives just a single property called the title, which means wherever you're displaying your component, you can pass in props and then make that props visible within your components. And like I said, if you're familiar with the JSX syntax or React programming, this should be a walk in the park because it's almost exact the same. Talking about how the layout is done. So we've introduced a box component or a box snap element. And this is basically a container. You can compare it to a regular div element in HTML. It doesn't have a UI. It doesn't have a line or a border, but we are slowly working on improving the box element such that we add more properties for formatting how things can be done. Within it, I'm introducing the header, the divider, and the image snap elements. The heading, as we can see, takes in the prop which is coming in. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you see how this component is going to be surfaced on the snap. So on the right-hand side image, the outermost border is provided by the Snap platform just to show or showcase your content, and everything inside that is in the outermost box element. The heading is displayed in bold font, and the divider just puts a horizontal line across. You can now use images with a source right there in the component. And you see how the image gets its source value. So it takes in a string, which is basically the logo file or the SVG file. So the first line on the code shows how you import your logo from your SVG file, and then you use that in your image as an attribute. So using the box heading and divider image, the output is going to be what you see on the right-hand side. Moving on to more controls. So we also have a form control. So in the form control, you can now put in all the other user interface elements. So in this example, we are looking at an input box. So all input elements, if they are occurring within a form, has to be within a field outer element. So the field allows you to put your label in there, and the input provides you with some properties. For example, the name of the input element. If you have a placeholder, what you would like to show there. You can also have optionally a value property for the input so that you can provide a initial value, and that would be displayed in the user interface. As you can see, the form has a name, which means you would be able to get the value of this component by indexing or providing the form name, and thus get the whole, all the elements inside the form as a JSON object. So let's say I had 3 more text boxes in here: txt first name, txt middle name, txt last name. Then when you look at the value of the form object, you're going to be getting txt first name, middle name, last name, and their corresponding values. So adding or providing initial values and retrieving the values now become a lot more easier since you're having it as in this form of a component with all of these snap elements into it. Another interesting aspect we've added in this UI component release is even the keystrokes would raise events. So if you are typing in first name, then each keystroke is going to raise an event. You can capture that event and do your business logic based on that. Say, for example, you want to do a filtering list, or you want to do a data retrieval based on the content the user is typing in, then you can do all of that. So events are another important thing that's being added in this release. Moving on to another example, we've introduced a new component, the drop-down component. So this is the basic select component that you would use in HCL. It allows you to pick from a list of values. And you see that the drop-down is also enclosed in a field element. The drop-down has a name property, and you can provide an initial value to it. And the items within the drop-down can be listed as option elements. And in the option element, you provide the value and the display value. So this is, again, very similar to either HTML or React, where you can design your drop-down in a better way and you can display to the user. So the initial value is provided by the drop-down's value property. If you leave that blank, it just picks the first element in the drop-down. The drop-downs can also be placed side by side in a stack, horizontal stack. So this was one of the requests that our early adopters were asking for, where we can position elements properly on the screen. So you see, I have created two drop-downs and I have placed them inside a box element. The box element has direction and alignment properties. So the default direction value is going to be vertical. You can change that by providing horizontal. You also have an alignment property, which allows you to align the elements either to the start or to the end or to the center or with space around. So basically the regular CSS kind of thing where you can move your contents within that box. So this is useful for placing items next to each other. As you can see, the two drop downs in here, we can have them display like that. And not just drop downs, you can have buttons and any other element that you can display horizontal or vertical within the UI. This allows us to, of course, optimize the limited real estate that we have in the extension and make things work better for us. The drop down, as we've seen in previous examples, had options, but you can also use an array mapping, which we are very familiar with in the React world, to display a whole list of elements. So what I've shown here is at the top of the code window, I've got an array with my airport codes, and inside the drop down element, I'm using that array of airport codes to map each one of them and return the object, the option element. So in this way, whatever list of items that you have, you can use it to display elements. This is not restricted just to drop down on its options. You can have any element such as a heading or a divider or a text or a button. Any of these things can be iterated through using the array map and then displayed within the UI. The only consideration today is it should be the only element within the parent element. We are working on adding more items within the parent element such that you can have the parent element within it an iterated list and other elements as peers. Of course, as React developers, we know the importance of having a key property whenever you are iterating through elements. And if you see here in the option element, you do have the key, and that allows us to allows the browser to uniquely identify these elements. In that way, it's able to efficiently reorder them or modify them when the UI needs to be updated. Moving on to more controls that we've been adding, the row. So the row allows us to show information in a row. And like what you see on the right-hand side, we have passenger name, John Smith. This is a single row. Flight date, and the date is another row. Wallet, and the address is another row. So rows can be displayed with a label and the value. So in a row, you can place a text component. So that's another new element you're adding. You can place a text element or an address element or an image element. We would be working on the row component such that we add more elements into it. But for now, what's allowed is a text, an address, and a value. We also see the address element here. So you give your address, wallet address in the address property, and the platform looks at that address, and if it is already part of your addresses or accounts in your extension, then it intelligently displays it as account 6. So it doesn't show the whole hexadecimal value, but it shows the name that you have applied for in your wallet, and it shows that name. It also generates that image for it. If this address is not in your wallet, then you would see a shortened or an abbreviated version of the address, the hexadecimal value. We have added yet another element called the value. So as you see how the value is displayed at the bottom of the code window, the value can be put inside the row, and the value allows you to show two different values. And a good example here is if you want to show multiple currencies. So here I'm showing the dollar value, which is in the value property. And then you want extra information saying, for example, what's its equivalent in crypto, then you can show that in the extra property. So it shows it, like you see on the right-hand side, it shows the extra value in a lightly grayed font, but the value is shown in the bold font. So you can use this to your imagination as to how you want to show dual values for something that you want to display on the screen. We have the button components. So as you see at the bottom of the screen, we have two buttons, and I have aligned them horizontally center. So I now have two buttons at the bottom of the screen, but aligned horizontally and center. We have couple of variants on the button. One is destructive and one is primary. So the primary is default and it shows as blue, whereas the destructive, I'm still trying to figure out why that name was selected, but destructive shows it as the orangish red. So in our case, since a cancel button is supposed to mean to stop the operation, I just put that in the destructive variant, and the submit is shown in the primary or the default variant. The buttons no longer have a border. It just shows up like a link, and that is also useful because it helps make the screens look a lot better. We also have a spinner element that we introduced, and the spinner, as you see on the right-hand side, it shows that little image and keeps rotating until it is removed. So you can use this during long-running operations like saving information or retrieving data, and in that way, it allows the user to be involved with your user interface, and they know that something is happening while they are working on a background action. More elements. So as I said, we have the text element, and in the text, you can just put your regular text, and we have a font element such as the bold. In the past or previous versions of the controls, we had to work with Markdown, where we had to put a double asterisk around text and do all of that funny stuff. But now we actually have the bold element, so you can see the display of it on your right-hand side. And below that, we have something in italic. So again, that is available as an element, no playing around with Markdown stuff here. The copyable element, as the name suggests, allows the user to interact with it in the form of clicking on that little icon and copying the content of it. So this is useful for displaying information such as a voucher or an address or anything like that, where the user can directly copy it versus clicking and dragging with the mouse pointer. And finally, we have the link element on this page, where we now allow you to create a proper link element. Again, no playing around with Markdown. You actually have a proper element which hrefs, having the source and the actual text to be displayed. And all of these links open up in external browser windows, and which is why you have that little icon displayed next to the Snappy Airlines link, where it informs the user that they are going out of the extension and into an external, another tab or an external browser. So now that we've looked at the components and the elements, how do we render them? So I've shown you two examples on the screen where you're rendering a component from the home page. So when the user goes to the snaps menu and then selects your snap, the home page is displayed, and this is how you would display your component. So the first example up there is a shorthand version where you just return an object and having a single property, and then you provide the component that you want to display. So that is simple enough. But if you want a little more control, like for example, we have a context that you can pass into the component, and in the component, you can read the value, then you would use the long form, which is the second example. So here you use the Snap API called create interface. For those who are looking at seeing this method for the first time, the snap underscore create interface is an API which allows you to create an interface, and the interface would be designed in the UI property. So you have the UI property here, which refers to your component, and then you have a context, which is passed into that component. And here you're saying it is foo bar. The snap underscore create interface is a main method that is used all over to create your interfaces. So when you're creating a brand new screen, like a dialog or an on-install page or an on update, that's when you would use the snap underscore create interface. Its sibling methods are snap underscore update interface and snap underscore get interface state. So the update interface, as the name suggests, is when you want to morph this current screen into something else. So this is an important concept because when you create a screen using snap underscore create interface, it returns you an ID. As we see in line 87, an ID is returned by this method. You would use this ID to modify the interface when you want to change the elements. So this ID is always passed into your handlers, and you would be able to then further morph or modify the interface depending on your situation. Let's say, for example, you are creating a workflow like booking a flight ticket. So you start off with creating an interface which shows few controls on the screen, and you keep that ID around. When you're ready to move to the next step of your booking a flight, you click on the next button. You are still going to remain on that same interface, but it's going to be modified or morphed. And that's when you would use the snap underscore update interface method, passing in the existing ID and a new component. So what the Snap platform now does is it looks at that ID and says that I have the home page displayed currently, but you're asking for an account page to be replacing it. So now I use that same interface, but I now put an accounts component in there and thus modify the view of your interface. So in this way, with an initial create interface and successive update interfaces, you would be able to create a workflow on a screen which makes it change from one look and feel to a second look and feel and a third look and feel, all the time remaining in that same interface, but getting a different look and feel. That third method which I spoke about, snap underscore get state interface. So when you have your home page and your home page has, say, a form element, text boxes, drop downs, and so on, each of those elements have their own names, right? So we looked at example of txt first name, txt middle name, txt last name. So when you call snap underscore get state interface and you pass in the ID of the interface, then the Snaps platform returns you back a JSON object, which is going to have key value pairs, and the key would be the control name and the value would be the control's value. So that's how you extract the value out of your component and thus use that information to create your internal data objects. So these three methods you would be interacting with a lot: snap underscore create interface, snap underscore update interface, and snap underscore get interface state. I just seen a message about there's a screen frozen. No, I was using the same screen to talk about all the three methods. So I'm sorry if it gave an impression that the screen is frozen. Yep. So moving on to the next slide. Okay, so this is how we capture user information as they work on the user interface. Like I said, we are big on events in this release, and you would have a main handler. As you can see it here, it's on your main file, index.tsx. So your main handler would allow you to capture user input and work accordingly with that. The handler receives the ID, an event, and the context. The ID is the same ID of that interface. So say, for example, you are on your home page and the user clicks on the OK button. Then this handler is going to be giving you the ID of that homepage interface. It's going to be giving you the event, which says the event type is a button click. And it's also going to be giving you a property called name on the event, which will have the button's name. So the same thing goes with text boxes. If you start typing in a text box, then the ID would be the interface's ID. The event would have a different event type, and the event.name would then have txt first name or something like that. The context is what we've seen in the earlier example when you were creating an interface. It's right here. Yeah. So you have the context of foo bar. So that context will be passed in here. So if you have the home page and the text box and the button and the user interacts with it, you now also have the context coming in, which is foo bar, and you would be able to do something with that context. In the current version of our library that we're releasing, the context is a read-only property. So you can only create it once and then pass it into this handler and you can use it. But in our upcoming releases, we are going to be allowing editing this context. So it can be used as something which is collecting data as you work through your screens, and that context will finally have your entire object. As of now, this demo which I'm showing depends upon the state of the snap, and it stores the information in the state. But in an upcoming release, you would now be able to use this context variable also to capture the user elements and store it in memory for the snap. So here we see an example of the snap update interface. So what the context of this would be, I've shown the homepage and there's a button in there which says show account information. The user clicks on the button and then it comes in here, and here you're capturing it in a switch case. So I'm first checking if it's a button click in line number 104, and then I'm checking which button was clicked. Line 106, I'm having the button name. So there might be some stuff in the snaps state that I want to use. So I'm collecting that information using my utility function getState, which returns back the snaps state. So that's the place where I'm storing all information. And then I want to now show the next page, which is the account info component. So I'm calling the snap update interface. This is one of the other methods which we just spoke about. I'm passing in the same ID. So the Snap platform knows that it does not need to create a new interface, but it just updates existing interface based on that ID. And I'm also informing it which is the new component it should be replacing in that interface. And in this case, I'm using the account info component. You can also see how we passed in props to the component. We've looked at an earlier example where I defined a component which receives props. So here I'm passing the snap state as a prop into the component. So that component has all the information required for dealing and displaying in the data. Again, if you're a React developer, then all of this should be really simple for you because it follows the same paradigm. All your button clicks, your text box key enter change, your change events, your drop down change events, all of that would be funneled into this single input handler. So for buttons, you would check the button click condition, and then you would do a switch case for all your button names. For drop downs, for text boxes, you would capture all the user events here. And here is where you can write your logic. Developers can use a better model to segregate information, which we shall look in a code demo, where I have all the code related to a component in a separate file versus having everything within this one user input handler. And we'll see an example of that in the code demo later. Cool. So now that we've been introduced to these components, let's see a demo of how these components have been tied together. And in that demo, we'll look further at some design elements. And once that demo is completed, we look at the code which has been used to implement that demo. So pay attention to the UI because I'll be referring back to that UI while I'm showing you the code that it has been used to write it. So stopping this presentation and opening up my browser. Okay. So hopefully all of you can see this new window, and this is the place I'm going to be displaying my demo. So this is a companion DApp, and I'll go ahead and reinstall the Snap in it. So just so this is just going through the workflow of how the Snap installation happens. So I've clicked on that and I'm saying Snappy Airlines. Installing Snappy Airlines gives you the following permissions. These are the few permissions that I have for the Snap in terms of managing lifecycle hooks such as install and update, in terms of displaying a custom screen like a home page, in terms of managing state because I'm storing these state variables in state values in the Snap, displaying dialog information if I want to show prompts, alerts, or notifications. Confirm, and it goes ahead and completes the installation. And then I have, since this is the first time the Snap is being installed, it is showing the on install page. So on the on install page, like I said, this is the place where you as a developer can show information about your Snap. And all I've done, unfortunately, I can't increase the font on the MetaMask. It just it's a scroll window, so I'll deal with. I hope you all can see the font on this. So here I'm showing a heading, an image, a divider, and a text element with a link in it, another text element with the bold font. And I'm also having a button here which goes directly to the home page. So you can have this element here where the user can be taken directly to your home page, or if you're not interested in doing that, you need not have a homepage link here, and just be done with the OK button. The OK button is from the extension. You click on the OK button and you're done with the installation. To get back to your home page, so now this is an on-demand action. So the user can now go to Snaps, see this install Snap, and come here, and they would now see the home page. So the home page has 3 buttons along with the heading and the image on top. And the home page is a place where I have it like, I mean, the name says it all. It's a home page. That's where the user is able to interact with all the functionality that you provided. And here I'm having 3 major functionalities exposed with buttons in here. Now, when the Snap was installed, there was, in the on-install process, I had written some code to collect the member information. So I look at the wallet address and I look into the Snappy Airlines database. I make an API call and say, does this user exist as a member? And I get back the member information. Along with that, I'm able to also get the flight history. So this user is using the Snap for booking their flight tickets. So we also have their flight history, even upcoming flights. And then there's a third functionality in there, which is to book a flight. So that information already has been retrieved in the on install hook. And let's see the information that we pulled in. So as a user, I might just go into account info. And here I'm having a simple UI, which is using the row components, which shows the account or the members information. So I am John Smith. So I already have a member account with Snappy Airlines. So it just retrieves that. John Smith, here's my frequent flyer number. I've been a member since, miles accumulated. I go back to the home. So with this kind of a design element, I can go into a functionality and return back to the home. And what I'm doing here is calling, I have called a Snap create interface initially. And on each of these button clicks, I'm calling the Snap update interface. So in this case, I'm updating the interface to account. When I click back home, I'm updating the interface back to home. When I click on flight history, I'm updating the interface to show the flight history component. So in the flight history component, here is an example of how you can show a lot of information in a paged fashion. So I've used the array mapping technique to show the list of flights that the user has, and I'm using horizontally stacked buttons below it for pagination. As I'm on the first page, my button is disabled. So that's another feature we've added to buttons. You can now disable the buttons and then click on next page. I'm calling update interface, passing in the next set of information and displaying the flights. Again, next page, and finally I reach my last page. The last page disables the next page button. So I can go back and forth on this pagination. And again, what's happening behind the scenes is snap underscore update interface is being called to update your interface. Return back to the main page, clicking on home, and now I'm here. So now let's look at our interactive workflow, which is booking a flight. Since the Snap already knows who the member is, it pre-populates some of the information on the screen. So when I start on booking a flight, it opens up a window. It opens up an interface. And there are some elements in here added again, which can be helpful to the user. Say, for example, if this is a wizard kind of a workflow, there are 4 steps in this workflow. I've created a row element at the top here, which says step 1 of 4. It just gives a user indication of how this workflow is going to proceed in terms of how many steps and where they are currently in the process. I've pre-populated the information with John Smith so the user can proceed further. Let's see what happens if they remove some fields. So if the user removes this data, this is like a problem for my UI because I need these fields as required information. So I've built in a little validation module in here. So when I try to click on next, it gives me an error, 2 error messages. First name cannot be empty or last name cannot be empty. So let me put in that information. So I'm going with my name and I'm putting in first name, last name, and now it allows me to go further. In the next screen, I do have some more information about the flight. So this is where I'm collecting the date for the flight and I'm using my drop downs. So let's say I want to go Paris to, let me go to Paris. Paris to Paris. So this again is an error and I can catch this error in my validation module and I can say from and to cannot be the same. Now, while I'm here, if I realize that I made a mistake in my name, I can go back to the previous screen and I can say something else here. Mario, put in John and continue with this. It now repopulates the screen based on the information. So like I said, I pick another destination, so New York to Mumbai. I move next. And as I'm coming to the end of my booking of the flight, I now just have a screen which shows a whole review. So in this way, I have a screen which has a row component showing all the pertinent information that I've put in. And I've also used the value component in here to say that this flight is going to cost me $4,500 and 1.21 ETH. Again, I can go previous next, make corrections, or I go to the last step in the workflow. I click on next. and the last step is completed. So I would have normally put a spinner in between that because I'm going to do some backend process, take the data, generate a voucher. To make it simple on this UI, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a voucher for the user. So now the user can copy this voucher and then use this voucher on the Snappy Airlines website. They go in there and apply the voucher and are able to get their ticket, their flight ticket. So with this done, the user is now on step 4 of 4. They now know that they have completed their workflow and they go back to the home page. So this gives an idea of how we can create an entire workflow starting from the home page, having major functionality, moving into each sub functionality, coming back to the home page, having a wizard kind of a workflow, allowing the user to see the steps. We also see validation and how we can take care of making sure the user enters the correct information, making the validation work only when you move forward, but the user still can move backward and look at errors that they have made. So that's a demo, and let's quickly look at the code so we understand what's happening. So it's a simple repository. You can create the template by using the template command on yarn. So yarn creates snap, and that creates your template with two projects in it. One is the site, which is the companion dApp, and one is the snap. The companion dApp is just those 4 buttons that we've seen to install the snap and so on. So there's nothing much in there. Everything, all the interesting stuff is in the snap folder. And if we look in here, the way things can be now designed is a lot more modular, just for the reason that we are having components involved and not the previous version of the UI elements. So let's look at the most simplest component that I've created here, say, for example, the header. So we've looked at this, how we use the box element, how we use the heading, image, and divider, and now we have the header element. Similarly, we have the footer component. Things are out here laid out exactly the way we've looked at in the code snippets. And then I'm putting together on my on install page, I'm putting my header component, the footer component, a divider, and a button to go back to the home page. Now, if you look here, I've created a button click handler right inside this component. It doesn't look like I've made it look like a button click handler, but it's actually just its own standalone method. I've created this handler saying what would happen if this button has been clicked. And again, just to prevent hard coding button names, etc., all over the place, I've created an enum which has got all my buttons and the button names in it. And that way I can use these enums in all the places and have the hard coded value just in one place. So the idea here is when this button gets clicked, I want this method to be called and put all the functionality for the onInstall component in one file. If I look into the index file, so this is the place where I show the input handler is created. So I scroll down to my input handler. So here's the handler and here's the button. So notice I don't have my hard-coded button value here. I'm using the enum. It allows me to make my code cleaner. And inside here, I'm calling the method that is here. So although this component here looks like all the functionality is right here and linked in here, it is just the appearance of it. The idea being everything should be related to this component in this file, but the wiring of it together happens in the handler. So in here, I'm calling the click button. In here, I'm having the page information, pagination, next page, previous page. In here, I'm seeing the history. And then when I'm working with the workflow, here is the component which displays the first name, last name, and I allow the user to move forward or back. Here's the buttons which allow the details, such as the flight date, airport codes. Finally, I have the review page, go back to the previous page or move forward to the voucher page. And finally, the voucher button click where I display the voucher, I do the voucher information in that click. So code can be written totally modular. All your components can be created just as you would do it in a regular React program. So your name component has all the form and fields here. Your details, which is the date and airport codes, can be in here. And the way you tie it all together is in the index file or wherever you have written your user input handler. So that is a quick demo on the code, and I would be having this repo link sent to you all, so you all can have a preview of this look and figure out maybe there is something maybe there's a lot here you can improve upon, but it gives you a general idea of how you can write your code in a component-based approach using JSX with the new components. So returning back to our slideshow. So we've seen the demo, we've seen the code, and many of you may be having questions about what's up next. When will this be available, and so on. So when you look at the road ahead, when will these components be available? They would be available in extension version 12, and we'll be putting it both in Flask and stable versions of the extension later this month. As of now, for this demo, I'm using a developer build, so it's available also as a public link, so I can share that link if needed, or you can just wait until the end of the month where we have this released in Flask and stable. Do you want more? Of course, everyone wants more. So we have the date controls coming up, radio buttons, checkboxes. All of these cool controls are coming up, which are going to be enhancing your UI. And we're looking at Q3 for delivering all these controls. What's more on the roadmap for Snaps? So Christian Montoya, he's a product owner, and he will be giving a talk in the first week of July, where he'll be talking a lot more on the roadmap of Snaps, and we'll be sure to share these links for upcoming events with all of you so that you're aware of what's on the roadmap. And finally, looking at ECC, for anyone who will be joining us at ECC, we have a number of interesting events and announcements over there. So make sure you join us at ECC and get to know the latest scoop on what's happening in the world of Snaps. And if you'll notice, it's kind of coinciding with the announcement Christian is making in July, because that's at the time frame of ECC. So be sure to be there, or you can always watch the recording of what we're having at ECC. So that was a lot of information that I was able to share with you. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to look at these the chat messages. So we have some time for Q&A. If you're interested, we can have any questions from anybody on the floor right now.
Hey, Mario, I have a question that's a little maybe outside of the scope of what you were talking about, but has to do with the roadmap. Is there a timeline for domain resolution to be included in stable?
Yes, just yesterday, a developer on the team sent me a GitHub repo link saying that the code changes have been merged in, and I was given a chance to look at it, but I was preparing for this, so I didn't get into it. But the latest updates have been merged into the repository. I'll get back to you on the timeline when it is going to be released in the extension.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Can the image size be adjusted? That's a question. Yes, so the images are SVGs. So based on the real estate, they can be zoomed in and zoomed out. We do not really give a dimension for images. So in this case, it is displayed within the main UI. So you see that the image is a little bit bigger on the right-hand side, but you can also have images in a row component, which means it will be having a label and a value on the right-hand side. And the value on the right-hand side can be the image, which means it will be a lot more smaller since it has to fit in that row element. So based on the context of where the image is being displayed, the size of the image will be restricted to that size. Again, you see here that the image is actually a big image, but when you put it on the screen on the right-hand side, it fits the full maximum width. So it is all the way from here till here, and that is the one which restricts the size of the image. So being SVG, it can be adjusted based on where it is being displayed on the UI. That was a question asked on the chat, so I just gave an answer for that. Nice. So we are at the top of the hour, and that brings us to the end of the call. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us on this call. And I hope that you got a lot of great information and go there and build these snazzy and snappy UIs based on these new user controls. And as the time goes by, you would see a lot more controls being added into this library. Thanks, and back to you, Shaima.
Thank you once again, Mario, for this excellent presentation. So this has been recorded. We do upload all the Builder Education series on YouTube. So I will share with you the link once on YouTube, on all our Telegram channels, and on our public notes page. Thank you very, very much, and meet you on the next Builder Education series.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.